Hi, welcome to our Mental Health Monday presentation. Thank you so much for tuning in. Uh, this week, our presentation is going to be about autism in 2023, evolving the diagnostic criteria. My name is Caitlyn, and I am here with Bee, and we are mental health and wellness peer educators for CAPS.
Yes, woohoo. So just a brief outline of like what we're going to be looking at. So we're looking at it says old criteria, but it's like the current criteria, but it's outdated. And we're talking about the old research about autism spectrum disorder, why it's outdated, that kind of stuff. Then we're talking about the new criteria, again, kind of new in quotes. This isn't official criteria, but it is the modern research that like modern scholars and like autistic scholars have been doing on autism in minority groups and things like that, and why it may be helpful to start incorporating that into the official diagnostic criteria. And then we've got our third section, which is how to fight the stigma, pushing back against ableism and embracing neurodiversity. So let's get started. So first section, old criteria. Let's take a look at it. So there are a bunch of problems with the old criteria, and I just wanted to lay them out, and then we're going to take a look at some of the criteria and kind of break it down. So some of the three biggest critiques that you see about the old criteria, the criteria that is in the DSM-5 of autism spectrum disorder, is it's outdated. Our knowledge and research of autism in the DSM-5 is very outdated. Research about that autism took place in a time where very little was known about mental disability, and ableism in the medical profession was rampant. You know, you think of all these big researchers, who are they, right? They're rich, old, white men. You don't see many women. You don't see many people from like people of color. It's outdated because a lot of people weren't allowed to enter that space, right? Which leads us into biased. Since the most popular research about autism was done on studies by straight, white, middle-class boys, which is a big portion of autism diagnoses. But of course, that's not all there is, right? Minorities, women, people of color were left out of the research. And so the way that autism presents itself in those groups can be different from what was researched, meaning that they aren't getting the diagnosis that is right for them. They're not getting the resources that they need, and often getting misdiagnosed and things like that. And also, ableist. The diagnostic criteria is littered with ableist subtext, with criteria often based on arbitrary definitions of morality and societal acceptance. It ignores the nuances of autism and how it can present in adults. See, it's based on that baseline of neurotypical, meaning you don't have mental disability, right? You don't have any mental illnesses or things like that. So it kind of goes based on that. And if you differ from that in any way, then you are deemed to have some kind of problem, right? Which can obviously be problematic. Just because someone has, you know, a mental illness, just because someone has autism doesn't mean they're not, you know, a productive member of society. You know what I mean? So let's actually take a look at some of the diagnostic criteria from the DSM-5. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, so you're free to pause and take a look at it, but just to kind of give an idea of what the diagnostic criteria looks like right now if you were to go and try and get diagnosed. Say if you think you're autistic, you want to get diagnosed, this is some of the criteria they would use. So A here, it says persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts as manifested by the following currently or by history. And then we've got all this writing down here: deficits in social emotional reciprocity, deficits nonverbal communication, deficits developing, maintaining, understanding relationships, things like that. Might seem fine, but to kind of break it down, this is where it says also in severity, based on requiring very substantial support, substantial support, or just requiring support. So again, this may seem all right, but kind of breaking it down is, it's very vague. It's not very specific. 3 essential features of autism from the DSM-3 way back then: lack of interest in people, impairments in communication, bizarre responses to the environment, all developing in the first 30 months of life. Just even the wording they use there is kind of like othering, you know, bizarre responses to the environment, severe impairments in communication, like ableist language. I myself am autistic, and I mean, I'm presenting this to you. I don't feel that I'm acting bizarrely or having severe impairments in communication. You know, it kind of focuses on like, what's wrong with you? You know, it's very vague, very othering, almost discriminatory language. And this, again, vagueness. What does requiring support mean? Now, many people with autism can benefit from support in different areas. You know, seeing the advent of fidget toys as a thing for autistic people to use, autistic children and adults, or noise canceling headphones, you know, different means of support. But again, so vague, right? Because autism affects everyone differently. It's a spectrum, and there's no one method of support that works for everyone. So just saying, oh, you require support without any elaboration is like, oh, okay, thanks, you know? So it can range from, you know, talking to a speech pathologist, having those communication boards as a child, or if you're an adult, you know, learning your own coping mechanisms and things like that. Now, moving on to new criteria, like we said, it's not official criteria, the DSM-5 criteria that we looked at, while not exhaustive, that is the criteria, but this new criteria is kind of based on new researchers entering the sphere, right? And these are the big three efforts that modern research on autism is trying to take. They're trying to take an unbiased approach, more holistic research studied under its cultural lenses, including minorities that were previously ignored. So including those people of color, including women, including queer people, right? And they're trying to make it more specific. They're trying to draw on specific adult experiences that adults can relate to. Because if you say you have severe deficits in communication, what does that mean, right? But more modern research is trying to kind of pull in examples from actually autistic people, trying to say, oh, well, when I was blah, blah, you know, they bring up specific moments. And there's more research in general about autistic adults, because, you know, you're looking up, how do I cope with this autism thing or that autism thing? Most of the suggestions you see on the internet is how to help your autistic child, right? And that's wonderful. You know, I love that there's resources out there for like autistic children and parents of children with autism, but the autism doesn't go away when the kid turns 18, right? So you need research with and for autistic adults as well. And that is where this new research is coming from too. And again, current. New studies are being done by scholars every day. And it's starting to come out and contradict those old ways of that old research. So we're trying to get it updated. So the DSM-5 is the most current. I believe they're working on a new DSM-6, I would assume the DSM-6. So we're trying, people are lobbying, you know, scholars and activists and stuff are trying to lobby for that more specific, more holistic criteria for autism diagnosis. So kind of breaking down, again, not the official, let me get my little camera out of the way here. Not the official diagnosis, but kind of just like where they're heading, what they're trying to say with this, quote, new autistic criteria. So there's a paucity of qualitative literature exploring experiences of individuals with ASD, focusing on the experiences of young girls as opposed to those young boys, right? Have striking themes of victimization and isolation. While some participants felt nurtured by female peers they had known from a young age, the majority experienced bullying, which they linked to interpersonal difficulties and subsequent ill mental health. Studies using mixed adult samples identify experiences of social isolation due to difficulty developing and maintaining relationships and an awareness of a mainstream world they are unable to access. So even this is already so much more informative than the other thing we just read from the DSM-5, right? It's saying we looked at young girls, we looked at adults, we looked at mixed adult samples, and let me pull out my little annotation thing here. Like this sentence here, an awareness of the mainstream world they're unable to access already does like so much more for talking about the autistic experience than that other criteria, right? It kind of gives you a sense of what it, rather than what it is or what it feels like to have autism, you know what I mean? If that's making sense, but again, more specific, right? So this is kind of breaking it down more. Very similar, right? But again, more specific. It expands upon it more. So instead of just saying deficits in emotional reciprocity, it gives examples, right? So it's hard having back and forth conversation. You know, if you don't have the same interests, it's hard to mask that, right? Or you don't respond well to certain social interactions. You can't really keep eye contact. They've talked about, you know, toe walking, things like that. So again, just more specific experiences, trying to, you know, hone in on the more qualitative ways that people experience autism instead of just that hard numbers data, right? And then some more different criteria for autism in adults, specific to adults instead of just children. Now, while it has kind of been universally agreed upon that autism is there from birth, the way it presents in adults is very different than the way it presents in children, right? So some common signs: hard to understand what others are thinking or feeling, seeming blunt or rude, taking things very literally. For example, you may not understand phrases like break a leg or sarcasm, or having the same routine every day, getting very anxious if it changes. That one I relate to a lot. Other signs, you know, not understanding those social rules, such as not talking over people, avoiding eye contact. We noticed that. High pattern recognition, you know, special interests, or liking to plan things very carefully before doing them. These are all very new observations of autism in adults that aren't normally present in children. Most of these can be, but it's different when you're an adult, right? Because you're navigating that adult world in a different way. And then we've got one for autism in women, which differs, right? So real quick, a study reported that autistic males have greater externalizing behaviors, but women have better internalizing behaviors. And what does that mean? So it reported that autistic women may present lower cognitive ability and adaptive functions, but generally levels appear to be similar to autistic males. So you might, like, the internalizing behavior is that isolation, right? Or that interpersonal bullying that we saw or talked about briefly a couple slides ago, right? So it appears a little different. So with all of this in mind, there is, no matter how much research we do, there's always going to be that stigma against autism, right? You hear the word, some people say it's taboo. How do we fight back against that? So I'm going to turn it over to Caitlyn for that.
All right, so for our third section, as they said, we were going to talk about how to fight the stigma surrounding autism. And from what I've read, there are three key aspects when it comes to affecting how the mass public views people with autism and getting them to be more inclusive when it comes to that. And one of them that I read was positive representation within media. And historically, the representation of people with autism within media has not been great. So having more individuals or characters within TV shows portrayed in a positive or accurate light, accurate being very important, will decrease how the public perceives people with autism having negative connotations that come with it. And from what I gathered via articles written by people with autism, I have gathered that three good examples have been The Good Doctor, Atypical, and then Loop, which is a little Pixar short, which is very cute, by the way. The second step is to increase public knowledge of autism. And from this source, I got that 1 in 54 children are on the autism spectrum. However, the general public, when given a short quiz about autism and how it affects people and what it is, it had a pass rate of about 64.3%, or that was the average score that people got on it, which is not great. And it shows that the mass public doesn't really know as much about autism as we like to believe. So as individuals, it is very important for us to help educate ourselves and to further educate the others around us. But it is also important to support different campaigns, like educational campaigns that strive to educate the public about autism, such as participating in Autism Awareness Month, or helping different organizations that you deem good to support after doing research on them. And then the final step is to support neurodiversity. And I know that I say in a classroom or workplace, but it is very important to support neurodiversity everywhere you go. But we're going to focus on the classroom or workplace, and where it is very important as well to support the neurodiversity. So creating a safe and inclusive space is very important, especially when it comes to getting rid of negative connotations that may come with having autism or anything else that would be considered making you neurodivergent. And some ways to help do so is to openly discuss neurodivergence in a healthy and safe manner, having conversations where people can openly talk about how they feel, most importantly, in a safe manner where they feel comfortable doing so. Also discussing your strengths and weaknesses with one another. Let's say you have social anxiety, so maybe in the workplace you don't necessarily feel comfortable leading a meeting. However, you are more than willing to help with behind the scenes work, like creating the presentation. Those are some strengths and weaknesses that can be discussed with each other. And those strengths and weaknesses do not make you any less of a good worker or a good student. So being able to discuss what we are good at, what we feel comfortable doing with one another will help people realize that while we may differ neurologically, like there's not much of a barrier between us. Promoting self-advocacy is very important, even outside of supporting neurodiversity, but prioritizing allowing people to speak up for themselves, especially when they feel like a boundary has been crossed or they have been given something that they are not willing to do. Speaking up for yourself is very important, and promoting your workers or your coworkers to do so creates a very comfortable environment. And finally, inclusion. Including everybody and everything has always been very important. It's very much so stressed in the classroom and less so stressed in the workplace, but it should be prioritized everywhere, where everyone is included, making sure everyone feels safe, everyone feels comfortable, and everyone gets the same or the opportunity to have the same experience as everybody else. And then that is our Mental Health Monday presentation. Thank you so much for watching us. If you have any questions or you want any more resources about anything, we have listed all of the contact and the location of the Counseling and Psychological Services office. We have also listed a crisis line that you may call if it is after hours or if you would like to talk to somebody immediately. And we've also given the email where you can send a quick question, or if you would like to look into receiving resources, you can also send them a quick email. Thank you so much.